to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. Kind of want to get into the Trump stuff and the election and everything surrounding that here in a little bit, but I kind of want to dive a little bit into the economy because people have been seeing what the stock market's doing and we're hitting another record high and what all comes about with this. And then I kind of want to slide into what now President Obama has been doing. And then we'll kind of like lead into the Trump stuff there. I'm going to go ahead and just start out with the Ron Paul Liberty Report because since we're going to cover the economy, this one's a Mythbusters is inflation on the doorstep. So we're going to go ahead and dive into this because a lot of people have already seen inflation and it's not a extremely significant amount. Unless you live check to check, then it can tend to be a pretty big impact when you look at food costs, all this. And there's a lot of people, even though now they have a job, they're still only making what they made back in 2008, sometimes less, maybe a little bit more. And a lot of them might even work. They might make more an hour, but they work less hours. Therefore, they're really not ahead of where they were. Some are behind of what they were. And I know people in all those spectrums and a few people, you know, that they make more only because they were in an industry that could weather that type of recession. And with all the possibilities with interest rates and what the Fed might do for the next step, and you have the Dow and everything, S&P hitting record highs, what type of false premise can that also set in an economy that has not yet recovered? And we still don't know what Trump's going to do until he does it. I don't look at people's words definitely when they're in a political office. You have to look at their actions. So a lot of people are going to have to hold Trump's feet to the fire to make constitutional type reforms that will protect your rights rather than the rights of that few people, which aren't really rights. They're false rights. We can only give the rights we ourselves have. And when you look at the constitutionality of a lot of this stuff, we know that the false premises that have been out there to justify some of these laws and regulations are really a lot of rhetoric, not based on facts. Being a libertarian, in philosophy, I do not see the Constitution as something that's going to save us in the sense that it has to be the population. But if we can get back to a more limited government, more constitutional government, libertarian ideas aren't too far from that. Therefore, you tend to have a little bit, not so much out there type acceptance from people because they understand, providing for themselves, not, providing for these multinational corporations and uber rich special families out there. Many of you already know what families those are. But let's go ahead and dive into this Ron Paul Liberty Report. Mythbusters is inflation on the doorstep, and we'll discuss this right after.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. This is the day we do Mythbusters, and the co-host is Chris Rosini. Chris is also the editor of the RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Chris, welcome to the program today.
Great to be with you again, Dr. Paul.
Wonderful. There are a lot of things that we can talk about, and of course we spend a lot of time talking about the importance of the election and what that has to do with the foreign policy and domestic policy. But I'm sure we can't get by without mentioning, the consequences of the election, but we'd like to touch on an important subject. And what is that subject for today?
Yes, the Federal Reserve has been hiding from the news for quite a long time now, so it's time to get back to work on the Fed. So let's get started. We're going to talk about inflation specifically today. And many, in fact, most Americans believe that inflation is a rise in prices. But a rise in prices is just an effect. And if you just focus on the effect, the cause can hide in the shadows. So, Dr. Paul, please talk about the cause of the rise in prices.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If you just look at prices going up and distortion of different prices of different commodities, then you miss the point. Where does it all start? And we've had great economists, including Milton Friedman, say inflation is always a monetary phenomenon. And yet some of those same individuals are very much inflationists, and they claim that one of the reasons we had a long depression in the 30s is they wouldn't inflate long enough, and failing to point out really the mischief of the Federal Reserve during the 1920s. But first off, I think people have to understand the definition, because 99 times out of 100, if they talk about inflation on TV, or most professors, it's always rising prices, and they talk about general price levels. That is not the correct way to look at this. And they will also say that, deflation is when prices go down. But they'd never distinguish that prices go down when you increase productivity. And so that's another variable in there. And all of a sudden they get distorted to the point where they associate economic growth with rising prices. If you don't have economic growth, then the Federal Reserve embarks on a position and say, what we need is to have rising prices, and then we're going to have economic growth. They got it all twisted. You can have it because if you have a healthy free market economy and you get the central banks out of the way and you have economic growth and productivity and advancement economically, prices go down. The value of your purchasing power go up. Real wages go up. But they don't see it that way, and they don't want to see that way because that would put the central bank out of business, and they have to be the orchestrators of the economy. They're economic planners. They're actually taxers. They run a tax system because They want big government, and therefore, if they just print money, they don't have to go and directly raise taxes. But there is a big difference between looking at prices going up and looking at money supply going up. I want to put a chart up to show what happened since this last recession started and the recession that we're in, to show what has happened to the money supply. And there it is. It's a chart that's been seen a lot of times. It gradually is rising, on the left-hand part from the 90s on up until when that recession hit. And the monetary base at that time was around $800 billion. And then the calamity hit, and they did not want to do what they thought they did wrong in the Depression. They didn't print enough money. Instead of liquidating debt and allowing the market to adjust itself, as it did in 1921, they said, we're going to stop this recession. So they printed and had QEs, and look at what happened to the money supply. That's inflation. That's where it started. And then the Fed became very annoyed because the money wouldn't circulate. The markets didn't respond to the way they wanted. And they thought, well, they'll get economic stimulus and prices will start to rise and wages will go up. And they work on the assumption that inflation, inflating the money supply, isn't all that bad because prices will go up, but wages will go up and profits will go up and everybody will be happy. It doesn't work that way. It never has worked that way because some prices go up much faster than others. And they kept reassuring themselves during this recession that everything is okay because there's not a whole lot of inflation. The cost of living isn't going up, which was a lie. They did it purposely. They distorted the numbers. But it was true that some prices were going up much faster, like the stock prices were going up, healthcare was going up, government was involved in that. When we had the housing bubble, the house costs were going up, medical care skyrockets when you have Obamacare. So they can print money and they can have a mathematical formula on what it's supposed to do, but they're never right. This is the wonderful thing that's happened to the Fed. They are on the defensive right now. In these last 10 years, they've been so wrong on everything that they've done, and they don't have much left. And it's mainly because they won't define it, and they have these false principles of what wealth is. They think if you print money, you have wealth, which is not true. You just dilute the wealth from this. And they have to understand how prices come about and why they do vary. Because they don't understand and they reject the whole notion of what Austrians teach, and that is that prices have a subjective element to it. And just because you and I might think that such and such should be a certain price because the money supply went up a lot, if they doubled the money supply, it would be wrong for us to say, well, the cost of a loaf of bread is going to double. That is not the case. In the old days, even during Adam Smith's time, when they understood about free markets, they were still accepting the notion that value comes from labor, the labor theory of value. And this it gives the philosophic background for socialism and communism, because they want labor to be reimbursed rather than by the market. They want it to be reimbursed with a mathematical formula. And that doesn't happen. Only productivity tells you where the money should go. And under this situation of free market pricing, to sort out the mistakes and try to change things, is that they get these messages, and then they confuse everybody by just avoiding them and let the people go. So it's the market economy that can sort this all out, but the mischief on inflation starts where I showed you just this chart. It's the creation of new money with the pretense that it's going to solve all our problems. And of course, that is not the case. A better understanding of monetary policy would have prevented all these problems that we've had all the way back to the Great Depression and the inflation of the 70s, the doldrums that we're in today, the financing. Well, there's so many things that could have been prevented if we would have had a better understanding of the cause and effect of why prices go up, because people get hurt when prices go up, obviously.
The next major error/myth that we're going to cover is when the Fed counterfeits dollars and the money ends up going into the stock market or the real estate market. The Fed chairman is hailed as a genius. I remember Alan Greenspan was referred to as the maestro. However, when the money goes into consumer prices or drives up the price of gasoline and oil prices, the Fed has to go into damage control. Dr. Paul, please describe why both scenarios are actually bad for the economy.
Well, they never want to blame the Fed for a problem. I remember this clearly in the 70s when Nixon put on wage and price controls, closed the gold window. We were in a deep recession essentially for a whole decade. And nobody really on the TVs or financial statement, nobody would suggest, because it even like today, they don't want to say, well, it's all the Fed's fault. What they said was, well, it was OPEC, oil prices went up. And that filtered through the economy, and everybody had to have oil and gasoline, and that was the source of the inflation of prices. And yet, of course, that wasn't true. So other people who were the more conservative say, no, it's the labor unions. The labor prices are going up. And there is some truth to a problem that is created by artificially pushing labor prices up, with union power given to them by the government. But prices of labor should be determined by the market. And if labor goes up, because if there's a healthy economy and somebody's very productive, their real wages are definitely going to go up. And an industrial revolution, that did happen when Ford gave his workers $5 a day. It was gigantic, but nobody should have ever called that inflation and was bad. But in the 70s, it was blame the unions, blame wages, blame OPEC, but it never said blame the Fed, for what they're doing. And yet everything the Fed does is mischief. It's a distortion. They finance the welfare state, which is a distortion and affects labor and the incentives to work. It affects, our ability to satisfy the special interest, like the military-industrial complex and building weapons we don't need. And another thing that was just horrible that came out of the Depression was when the system wasn't working, and this is a thought that still lingers, is that they finally got out of the Depression with a war. And, of course, that's a horrible thought. And wars never really improve the living conditions of the people. Maybe a few people who make bombs and airplanes, they might have an improvement. But it's not an economic true stimulus. It's a negative because you're not doing anything to help. But ultimately, this whole thing that the Fed is involved in, it promotes big government, and big government can't get big unless it undermines the personal liberties of the people. It undermines the market economy or interferes with the market economy. So this is why it is so dangerous, and there's nothing good that can come of it. For years, though, they were involved since 1913, even though they really messed up in the 30s. We've had a lot of ups and downs and recessions, but the Fed escaped blame, because they would say, well, we're having a good time now. We're in a positive growth period. Thank the Fed for it. They're keeping the interest rates where they're supposed to be. And then when the recession hit, which was inevitable, the Fed would wait a couple of years and let a little liquidation of debt occur. And then the Fed would come to the rescue and start printing more money. So the Fed was getting credit for temporarily solving a problem they created. And they've lived with that reputation. But it's the end of the line now, which tells me that we're at the end of a stage where central banking and fiat money is not working as they have planned. But basically, it should be seen as a moral issue, which is very bad, because if an individual went out and they did have the printing press machine, the real printing press machine, and they could print Federal Reserve notes, and nobody could tell the difference, it would be illegal, immoral, and a very serious crime. But for a while, those people who got to spend those dollars, they were doing quite well. But eventually, though, as this filtered through the economy, more and more people had more money without production, so the payment will be higher prices. And that, of course, is what we're facing today, because a lot of people suffer more than others, and that's really where the discrepancy comes. And this is part of the anger that has existed prior to and during this election period, is that a predictable event is that the very wealthy and those who get the money first, the government, the banks, the banks, and also the big corporations, Wall Street, and the ability to buy more stocks and bid up those prices, they would benefit. But the prediction has come true, according to Austrian economics, is that if you systematically undermine the value of a currency, you're going to wipe out the middle class. And lo and behold, that's exactly what is happening. The middle class is being wiped out, and yet they don't quite see it. Now we have the rise of populism. We have to do more to help the poor. We have to take away some of the benefits from the rich and print the money but give it directly to the poor. We need more protectionism, and all the populists, the unfounded philosophy in populism. They want to use that to try to compensate. Of course, I argue the case that is not going to compensate for it. That cannot substitute for sound money and a free market and absolute freedom in pricing. And of course, that would mean that you can't correct these things by, if real wages don't go up, you can't correct it by, artificially pushing wages up. In the Depression, they artificially kept wages from falling. And the day we live, and even this current election period, you saw, the initiatives, and the ones that had the initiative said, oh, the poor people are poor and we have to do something, so we're going to force people to raise the minimum wage. May well have been well motivated and they cared about the poor, but they're just making the problem worse. It adds to unemployment. It tries to temporarily cover the mistakes of the Federal Reserve and printing press money. So that hardly is the solution. But people have to realize that there's a problem out there, whether it's too much spending, too much debt, too much taxes, too many wars, too much welfareism, too much abuse in the system, too many government employees. You have to look to who does the financing. None of that could be financed if you didn't have a system of money that the Federal Reserve comes to the rescue and just be able to buy that debt. And they've been able to get away with this for a lot longer than anybody ever dreamed they could. And right now, though, while we're up against a wall, is that most people are realizing that the end is coming, and election or not, we still face a bleak future, economically speaking.
Yes, before we get to our last question, I just want to reiterate a great point that you made, that when prices start to rise and the economic bust comes, you can count on the media, the government, and the Fed to start pointing fingers at anyone but themselves. And it's very important for Americans to understand that if you're going to point fingers, it has to be at the source, not just worry about the effect, but the source, which is the Fed. Let's finish up, Dr. Paul. We're going to have a new president come January, and Donald Trump has a lot of proposals that he ran on and got elected. What do you think about his proposed foreign and domestic policies? And do you think that they're going to usher in a rise in the cost of living for Americans?
Well, to the very last question, will it cause a rise in the cost of living for Americans? Yes, but I would not put all the blame on Trump. And just like I did not put the blame on Obama for the recession. I put the blame on Obama for participating in the prolongation of it along with the Federal Reserve. And if Trump follows through with his spending policies, he will be a participant in it, but he will not be cause of the problem. The problem comes, really from that original chart I showed, where this monetizing of debt over the last 9 years is the real problem. This five-fold increase in the monetary base, which has yet to really be discounted in the market and circulate. So that's where the real problem is that we have to deal with. But the reason why I think we're going to see an igniting of price inflation, one, it's already started. Even before the election, we started to see some prices moving. One that was fascinating, I might have a chart on this too, was the price on copper. Copper has traditionally been an indicator that we have, that economists have used for years on when the cycles that the Fed creates have seemed to improve and there would be a growth period, that copper was one of the first things to go up. They would be anticipating, well, okay, there's been a liquidation of debt, the housing bubble has eliminated itself, and building of houses are coming back, and you need copper for the pipes and things like that. So even before the building starts, copper prices were an inch up. And it has been inching up. And in the last couple of days, it's been skyrocketing. And you say, well, isn't that good news? Because maybe they're going to go back and the millennials are all going to buy houses now. No, I think this time the message from copper is a little bit different than ushering in a new growth period. What it's ushering in is a new spending period because, the consensus now, I think it's a bipartisan consensus. And this is one thing that Trump might be able to pull it off because it's bipartisan that monetary policy hasn't worked very well. And therefore, they say what we need is more spending. We need more spending by the government. So the new administration is committed to massive expansion of money on highways and infrastructure, and also a massive rebuilding of the military. Guess what? They use copper and other metals prices are going up too. So I think the inflation monetarily that is there, and there's going to be this incentive. The psychology is going to change. I think one of the most fascinating things that's happened since the election last week is the huge increase in interest rates. And everybody's been dreading interest rates. And this was the market driving the interest rates up, or the anticipation. It wasn't the Fed all of a sudden saying, well, we're going to really pump up the interest on the 10-year Treasury, because they were so frightened that if they did that, it would crash the stock market. But here the market comes along and the interest rates go up significantly, and all of a sudden the stocks went up too. Before, anytime the Fed hinted they were going to raise the interest rates a little bit, the stock markets would go down. But here the stock markets went up. And even in the bond market, it just is a reflection of how unstable this whole thing is. Because in the last week, there was over $1 trillion lost in the value of bonds. Because when the price of a bond goes up, goes down, the interest rates go up. So interest rates went up on 30-year bonds and all, which if you look at this is going to mean the cost of paying those notes and all the debt that we have is going to go up. So yes, if they're printing more money to drive the interest rates down, that's one thing. But with interest rates going up, it's also inflationary too, in the sense that if people want to go out and do anything, they're going to have to pay a higher rate of interest. Where it will be helpful, though, are the people who are the savers and who have been cheated by the Fed and by the politicians for so long. Because if you're frugal and you want to be self-reliant, you save your money and have a CD, you're not earning any interest. But the problem with what's happening now is it's so artificial. We haven't really changed the Fed, but we're still working with the Fed, because right now, even though interest rates have gone up a little bit, in a significant amount, but if the spending continues and they go up too fast, anybody who's in any administration, any president is going to go to the Fed and say, don't make it worse. You're going to make the economy worse. So don't do this. Don't let the economy dictate interest rates. So we have a long way to go. And I think the problems are so built into the system, whether it's monetary, whether it's regulatory, and there are some good things that Trump says about lower taxes and lower regulations, but not the structural defects in the economy and the spending that is coming and the inability to finance that without a Federal Reserve. So we still have a long way to go, because reversal from a bankrupt system, a system that doesn't work anymore, a Federal Reserve that really doesn't work anymore, that problem isn't solved easily, even if you try to tinker on the edges, which is worth trying. I'm certainly for lowering taxes and lowering regulation. That's going to help a little bit, but it's not going to all of a sudden get a job for those 94 million people who are out of the workforce, and it's not going to all of a sudden get the millennials feeling good about their debt, because the debt overhang in the world, there's $360 trillion of debt. And it's all related, to the fiat dollar standard, because it's the reserve standard, and through fractional reserves. And if you allow that to unwind, you would really have deflation. So they're not going to allow that to happen, but they are going to keep doing what they're doing, and that'll eventually destroy the value of the currency. And if you look at the value of the dollar each day compared to the other currencies, you might say, the dollar's been up, the dollar's strong and all this. But ultimately, It's what the dollar purchases and what it buys will make all the difference. And that's the backside of what will the cost of living do. Cost of living has already been going up much too fast. The people know it. The people are angrier than anybody ever dreamed, even that I suspected, because their cost of living is way high, and they don't buy into the lies that we've been told about the economics or anything else. And this is the reason that people are very, very unhappy and why we have a change. So it'll be interesting to see how this pans out. But I want a philosophic change, because I do not believe for a minute that you can tinker and have a tactical or technical changes in any policies and really have a miraculous recovery. I think you have to address finally the subject of the role of government, how big government should be. Should they run up debt? Should we print the money to pay the debt? Should we regulate more so because there'll be mistakes made? And should we use it as a taxing authority? As long as that exists, we're going to march on and do these kind of things until the purchasing of the power of the dollar will be destroyed. And already, I think that is starting. But I do want to thank the audience, obviously, for being with us today. And thank you, Chris, for helping us out today on Mythbusters.
My pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. And to our viewers, I want to thank you once again for being with us. And please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Go there, subscribe, check them out. Now, with the stocks up, depending on what they do, we know these can be just bumps, and they may only last a week or half a week. But if they last long enough, but we don't see the actual recovery in the actual economy, not the stock market, the actual economy, the businesses, the retail, the factories, all of it. It becomes something where it can easily cause another recession, and they can do it purposely if they felt like it. And the thing is, if stock market, is just popping off, but no one's getting more jobs or better pay, it becomes one of those things that, the Fed goes, hey, look, the Dow and the S&P are just doing awesome. So we're going to raise interest rates, which they should have been raised, and they really do need to be raised. But the problem is, because they kept them artificially low, they kind of have drug out this recession. We've never truly came out of it. We're like right there on the edge of being able to get out of it, but we're at a catch-22, and I've said this before. We're going to kind of just drag along a little bit more if we don't raise interest rates a little bit. But if we do raise them a little bit, the economy hasn't kicked off yet, so it's going to be hard for a while. But when they artificially do this, you'll notice something sometimes. Gold and silver prices will temporarily drop down a little bit. That's a perfect time to buy the gold and silver. And we've already seen it. It dropped down to, it was around, I want to say, $14 for silver. And right now it's 18. So if, you bought an ounce of silver for 14, now it's worth 18, you're probably pretty happy. And as we continue to devalue the dollar, because I don't have some, enthusiasm that Trump's going to fix all this. I don't think he can. We'll see what happens. Of course, I always throw out that little bit of, hey, if you can do it, do it. But I'm not going to hold my breath either. It's one of those things that I've heard it all before. Show me. And we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But right now, I think people should be, investing in things that will hold its value. Meaning, if the dollar is devalued, it takes more dollars to buy the same amount of products. If you're buying something that holds its value, when you trade it for dollars again, you'll get enough dollars to buy something of equal value. Unlike if you just held on to dollars, well, yeah, those dollars could have bought you, let's say, one banana. Now it's going to take double that dollars to buy you that one banana. Keep something that holds its value, and it doesn't have to be just gold or silver. There's many things out there, and your abilities are something that can hold its value. If it takes more dollars, your abilities to do a job are worth more. But that needs to be something that's contractual between employer and employee. I don't believe in raising minimum wage. Raising minimum wage sends off like this bat signal to every business everywhere that you need to cut employees, cut costs, possibly move, and raise prices. So everyone gets a raise because, well, if the minimum wage guy gets a raise that much, I want that much of a raise. I still want to be above this guy because I've worked my butt off to be above this guy. It's one of those things that it's going to basically put us in a position that is absolutely no different, except employees probably lost their jobs. They'll get other jobs, but they probably lost their jobs. A lot of lower income people will have lost their standard of living. And at the same time, you still have to spend the same percentage of your dollars to buy the same amount of goods. Prices went up because your income went up. Therefore, you can't afford more than what you had before. And for those who lost their job or had hours slashed, maybe even lost their benefits because they have had hours slashed, those people are going to be in worse off positions. They go, yeah, and those greedy business people, they didn't lose out. Well, that's because in a business, you're constantly hedging for the future. You have to make sure you have enough capital. That way you can weather storms. And we, as, just the everyday person out there, should be doing the same. But we've been so bought into the system of credit that we're in the opposite position of where people used to strive to be. And it's been a large manipulation of, youth upon youth upon youth, brainwashing and indoctrination. Because at one point you work to be able to buy a house, not take a loan out to buy a house, which is now the case for most Americans. You would buy a house, maybe borrow some money from a family member, but not a lot. And then you would save money after that. Well, now we have people buying a house. They're basically in pretty good debt for at least, 25, 30 years. Time they're done with that, they don't have too much money saved back like they could have had. And we've come to accept that when that, if this would have happened immediately, there would have been uproar. But because they can beat you down and then offer you the helping hand, basically it's like someone punching you, taking your money, and offering you their hand to say, hey, I'll loan you some. And this is what's happened throughout American history. And it's not one thing that's done it. It's been multiple things throughout multiple generations. And we're here now. We'll have to see what happens under Trump and this Republican Congress. It's really hard to tell. And we could face some extremely hard times here coming up. And it's not going to be Trump's fault. It's not going to be Obama's fault. It's not going to be Bush's fault. It's going to be so many generations of Congresses and presidents and judicial systems and banking systems. It goes so far back that you cannot blame one person. But what you can do is hold the ones that are in charge right now accountable for whether they're helping to resolve it or they're continuing it. And Ron Paul has a few books out that he talks about the economy and, even pick up his Revolution book. And he has it's a pretty short book. It really kind of summarizes a lot of the ideology behind Austrian economics in the economic section of it. It's something that I urge people to check out. And of course, many people already probably have it in their collection. But in case if you don't, and you've never heard of it, A Creature from Jekyll Island. I think if you don't have that book or have not read that book, I think you really have to start there if you're going to understand the Federal Reserve. And even when it comes to gold and silver, it's something that I think that most people that have even a simple understanding of Austrian economics, they have a understanding of the Federal Reserve because of The Creature from Jekyll Island. Okay, give me a minute here. Sorry, issue. looks like I still have a good internet connection. We lost the internet earlier today. Wasn't sure if we were going to have it back up, but luckily we did. Okay, I'm trying to get all this back up here. Reload everything. Okay. Sorry again. I tried to get all these articles loaded back up. Okay. We're going to dive into the election. But I talked about my reasoning behind why I was not going to vote, because I no longer will morally put my name next to or behind a person that I don't think shares a basic principle and moral that I believe in. That doesn't mean I wish them bad or nothing like that. It's a simple fact that I want to feel that there's someone that has earned my trust. And when I hear too much of a flip-flop in people, Ron Paul didn't have that flip-flop. He was not a flip-flopper. He's held a basic principle, moral, and what he believes to be an ethical belief in what government should and shouldn't do. And I kind of share that. So I want to have that same, how should I say? I want to share in that type of a belief where I can say, well, these people have stood on this principle, this ground that they believe in, individuals' rights. It's not about, are you offended? Should you, be able to shut that person up? Or it's a simple, libertarian, non-aggression type belief. And a couple days ago, last Wednesday, or this past Wednesday, I wanted to play it then, but I had other things I wanted to cover with Trump getting elected and everything. Because this is something that I talked about before the election. Robert Murphy was speaking at Mises Institute, and he had a speech on, is it smart to vote immorally? And I found this pretty interesting, and it's something I want to share. I'm probably not going to play the whole thing, but he kind of gets a little bit further into depth than maybe I go, and it may make it a little bit easier for some people to understand. So I want to go ahead and cue that up. So let's get that queued up.
I'm here to talk, as you know, many of you know, I'm an economist, so I'm going to be talking about the economic approach to voting. So I'm going to have two roles here. I'm going to summarize some of what conventional economic analysis says, and then sort of give my cynical commentary. As we'll see, the mainstream economists, as usual, are really smart people, and they have nice conclusions and so forth, but often where they take it just shows that actually they know what they want to do beforehand. They have their political preconceptions, and all this mainstream formal garb is just really window dressing. So that I'll give you a little hint of where I'm going there. Also, let me disclose up front, I know people have different strategies and views. When I was younger, I used to go vote, and I would typically just go in and on the ballot pick the third party candidate, whatever the race was that was closest to the libertarian, because in some races they didn't have that, so I would pick like the constitutionalist or whatever. At this point in my life, I don't vote, but it's not that I think there's something intrinsically wrong with it. I know some libertarians think that, if you're voting, you're like in league with the state. So it's not that. And also, I don't want you guys to be defensive in case you are, like, who you're going to vote for. You've already done early voting. My point here is not to wag my finger and say, what did you do that for? I do kind of wonder that, but I'm not here to criticize. I'm just curious, baffled. And so it's more, I want to give you a framework and help you think through just to see, because as we'll see, a lot of the analysis of voting is really nonsensical when you think about it. So first of all, this whole notion of get out the vote or rock the vote, right? So there was a thing recently where Justin Timberlake, the pop star, he got in trouble because he went and voted in, I think it was in Memphis. I don't know if he lives in Nashville and that's why he was voting in Memphis, but in any event, he was in Memphis and he voted and he took a selfie, of his ballot and then tweeted that out or something, put it on his social media, encouraging and there was some hashtag, I don't know if it was get out the vote or whatever the cool kids are doing these days. But his point was, hey, I just did my early voting and you should too. Let's get out the vote. And there's this recurring thing every 4 years where a lot of celebrities go, and they're especially appealing to young people. And the implicit message is the reason our government, the state apparatus is so horrible is because the good, decent people all stay home, and it's only the evil people who go and vote all the time. And that's not really true, right? I mean, it's because really what's going on is I'm not in Justin Timberlake's head, but that would be kind of odd, wouldn't it? But I'm pretty sure what he means is, hey, all you progressives out there who really wanted Bernie, suck it up and go vote, because otherwise Donald Trump's going to be the president. We don't want that, right? If millions of potential Trump voters saw that tweet and said, Justin, you're right, I'm going to go vote, I think he'd be like, argh! Right? I don't think that's what he intended. All right, so there's that issue. Really so if you just think about, in general, to just broadcast, hey, those of you who are thinking, who are on the edge, you're thinking, I got to go to work that day and the lines, and just go ahead and vote. In general, unless you thought you were targeting a particular thing, they would just cancel each other out. I mean, voting is intrinsically really wasteful and stupid when you think about it. So I had a proposal one time. I put it up on Facebook. Got a lot of likes, so I'll share it with you guys. The market approved. I said, instead of our current system where everyone gets one vote, which is kind of wasteful, right? The people go and they largely cancel each other. What they should do is you go up to the voting booth every year, and then you get as many votes as you can do legitimate push-ups, right? Just think about that. We would still get awful leaders, right? Because in general, they would still cancel out, but now everybody would be in better shape, right? So, I mean, but that just kind of underscores how this whole thing is incredibly wasteful if what we're trying to do is just come up with some system to see, to gauge public opinion. All right, and Ryan has pointed out the problems with that. Now, what's really funny is economists have some pretty powerful results formalizing, sort of crystallizing the stuff that Ryan was talking about. And in particular, it's what's called Kenneth Arrow's impossibility theorem. So let me very quickly summarize what that is. So this is Kenneth Arrow, huge gun in economics, not an anarcho-capitalist by any stretch, for those of you who know him. But he had this famous result. Now, I know for sure what the result is, but I heard it back when I was in grad school and they told us this anecdote to motivate how he found it. I have not gone and read a biography, so this might just be an urban legend. But the story goes that Arrow was in grad school working on voting systems and so forth, and there were a lot of problems that economists had discovered. Economists had been studying voting systems at that point for decades, if not centuries. And just to give you an example, so if the simple majority rule, right, that leads to problems because let's say the public, looking at choices A and B, they prefer A to B, but if you looked at B versus C, they would prefer B to C. But if you looked at C and A, they prefer C to A, right? So it's what's called intransitive. So that's possible. There's nothing contradictory about that. That could be true, right? In sports, you could see that too. Like certain teams, like this team could beat them, they could beat them, but then they would beat the first team. That's logically possible. So that could be the situation. So if that is true, then that leads to gaming the system by the people running the elections. They can put if they want candidate B to win, they just got to make sure to arrange the sequence of face-offs to make sure that B faces the person B is going to win in the last round. Whereas if B had faced somebody else early on, he would have gotten knocked out. Okay, so economists knew in general there's theoretical problems with all these voting systems they had come up with, and they could do all kinds of things. Okay, let's have 10 total points that each voter gets, and you can assign the points to the list of potential candidates. So if you really like Jim Smith, you'll give all 10 points to him, right? But if you're he's all right, I'll give him 4 points, and I'll give my second place person 3 points. There's all kinds of things, but even there's gaming that's possible, that somebody might not respond truthfully. Or somebody might give 10 points just to the person that's their top pick, even though they really don't prefer him that much more than the second. So there's things like that where they studied it. So what Arrow did is he said, okay, let's just try to winnow this thing down. Let's just get rid of all the potential theoretical voting systems that are clearly stupid, that we wouldn't want to use, to then focus on the ones that have some intrinsic legitimacy to them, some appeal. And so he said, all right, so what kind of rules am I going to adopt to weed out clearly bad ways of translating individual preferences into some sort of social welfare function? Okay, this is probably the first time at a Mises event someone has said social welfare function, but I use the quotation marks, all right, so don't kick me out. Okay, so you get the idea what they're trying to do. They have a bunch of voters, like in the little model, who have preferences over things, and then we want to come up with some system to map from all the citizens' preferences to one, unified thing that represents the social will in terms of these preference rankings. That's what they're trying to do mathematically. So he said, all right, let me just come up with some criteria for a good mapping system, all right? And so he said, so for one thing, if every single person in society prefers A to B, whatever, these are abstract things, whatever A and B are. They could be candidates, they could be policies, like should we raise taxes, they could be states of the world, like should we crack down on pollution, doesn't matter. Just very abstract things because it's a mathematical model, but said if every single person prefers A to B, whatever our social rule mapping is, it better not turn out that the social rule says B is better than A. All right, everyone get that? That clearly, so they call it the unanimity rule. So that's pretty straightforward. I mean, regardless of your views of democracy, monarchy, what have you, clearly that seems kind of obvious. Yeah, that would be dumb if every single person thinks A is better than B, and yet our rule says therefore the government should do B because that's better than A. All right, stuff like that. He also said it should be transitive. If the social rule thinks A is better than B and B is better than C, then it better think that A is better than C. Okay, so that you avoid the cycling problem. Things like that. Okay, people say, yeah, that makes sense. Otherwise, that leads to problems. Okay, so he goes through and lists things like that. Another one was non-dictatorship. All right, which is very weak. Tradition just said it's okay if in any particular outcome the social rule has identical preferences for some person in society, but it better be at least possible with some combination of individual preferences that the social rule does not always map identically to one person's preferences, because otherwise that person would be a dictator. Okay, again, that's who the okay. So he goes through and lists things like that. There are some that were a little more technical that I can't really just summarize for you right here, but they were all as non-objectionable as the ones I just went through. There wasn't anything that was really stretching. Once you understood what it meant, you'd be like, oh yeah, of course you would want that in any kind of sensible rule. So he went and started proving. So he was looking for the space of all rules that satisfied these criteria, and it turned out it was the empty set, right? Meaning he concluded, he just ruled out and said it is impossible to come up in general when you allow for people to have all kinds of preferences that they might have. It's impossible to come up with a rule that satisfies all these criteria simultaneously. So it was called Arrow's impossibility theorem. So, and I didn't look it up. I think he found that like in the 60s. So do you guys remember how back in the 1960s, all of the economists and social scientists just abandoned their faith in democracy? You guys remember that? Right. Didn't happen. So, I mean, that should have been a literature stopper. That's boom. I mean, that was the most unexpected. Again, so that's clear what the result is. I mean, I know that's what the result is, but I don't know if the story I told about why he went looking for it, I don't know if that's true, but that's what I was told in grad school. And I don't think those people would have lied to me. So, all right, so you can see how it was a very unexpected result. He thought that he was just going to winnow it away and just find, like, let's focus on the stuff that's sensible, and then found, oops, I just ruled out all possible political systems. So what did they do? They just went, okay. And then they just kept going on and doing all their journal, their peer-reviewed articles and whatever, and publishing in that area. And so this is just another example, I think, to underscore how these guys are bluffing when they say to Austrians that, oh, you guys just use your verbal analysis, but we're very formal and we have our mathematical model, so we know what we're talking about. It's rigorous, but when you get something like that, they don't care and they just keep moving on. Another example, because I'm still holding a grudge on this, is my dissertation. One of the results I found there was, as some of you may know, the mainstream economists, they embrace what you might think is a productivity theory of interest, right? In their models, they have that interest equals the marginal product of capital. Austrians verbally blew that up in the 1800s. And so I was like, well, how can this be? The math is correct in these models. They're not doing a contradiction. So how? And I realized what it was. I won't bore you. Their models had one good, right? So once you allow for the world to have more than one good, which some would think empirically is true, the result falls away, okay? And so I just kind of did a little counterexample where I showed how, if we have two or more goods, then interest doesn't equal the marginal product capital. That doesn't even make sense in that world. You got to worry about changing prices, blah, blah, blah. But if there happened to be one good, the model reduces to what you guys are teaching us here in grad school. And so I showed this guy, and I guess I am making fun of him, but he's a nice guy. I'm not saying he's a jerk or he was dishonest, but I showed it to this guy who was real sharp with math and everything. And I was really excited, like, I did it, like Rothbard and these guys, they just didn't know to go do it with the math, but now I've done it, and so now it's going to change the world. These guys, and I showed him, he goes, somehow we know. And then he just kept going on with this thing. Somehow they know. So I think somehow they don't know, but the point is that this is just another example of where they get these results mathematically, and then if it doesn't, they can just come up with a way, okay, well, that's interesting, and we're going to go ahead and do something else. So with voting, like I say, it's the stuff Ryan was talking about. I mean, it's crystallized. You get it from mathematical economists to prove that, in principle, the general will makes no sense. That's an empty concept. It's nonsense. They prove that in principle. All right, let me focus a little bit more now on what some of you may have heard when economists who are real cynical talk about why they don't vote. Right? And so there's a standard argument. Let me just reiterate, there might be people here who have never actually heard it crystallized, and then I want to tweak it and say that's somewhat related to my own views as to why I don't vote, but it's not identical. And so here, the standard view goes something like this. An economist will say, okay, what would have to happen for your vote to be decisive, for the fact that you voted for a particular candidate versus another one, that made the difference over who's going to be in the White House, in January? And they said, first of all, the state in which you're voting has to be decisive in the Electoral College, right? That if you're in some small state and the winner ends up winning by a margin in the Electoral College bigger than the votes that your state has, it doesn't matter which way your state went, okay? And so there's that element. And then let's say, though, your state is crucial, that if your state had gone the other way, then a different person would have won. Even there now, it needs to be the case that in your state, the popular vote is determined by a margin of 1, right? So that's the only circumstances in which your particular vote would change, which way your state went. And then it also has to be true that your state going one way or the other determines who the president is. So just empirically, the chance of that happening is astronomically low. And so this is where they come up with this, quips like, you're more likely to get in a car accident on the way to the polling booth than to actually determine who the next president's going to be, right? So some economists who are real hard-boiled and cynical give that kind of argument and then say, and therefore that's why I don't vote, because I know it's not going to affect anything, QED, and they step away. So it's important to work through that logic, but strictly speaking, I don't think that's a great argument. That's a very utilitarian argument, and you wouldn't, or at least most normal people would shy away from applying that logic in other areas. So, for example, we're walking down and we see some guy passed out on a park bench and his wallet's hanging out, and you wouldn't say, "Oh, let's take his wallet." Whoa, that's stealing. You can't do that. And he goes, "Well, look there's lots of people coming and going. What are the chances someone's not going to take his wallet? Right? It might as well be me. It's not going to affect the outcome. No matter what, his wallet's gone. I might as well get it, right?" So you can see there how that wouldn't follow, at least necessarily. It would if you were, complete utilitarian, in an amoral sense and had no value system. But you can see how that argument by itself. So it's not that I endorse the version of the economist argument for not voting I just gave you. Mine's a little bit different. What I tell people is what makes no sense is when someone says, oh yeah, I'm voting for so-and-so. It turns my stomach. I can't stand the guy. Or in today's election, it's like, I can't stand her. But, I'm avoiding the greater of two evils by doing this. All right. So that's why I'm doing it. Yeah, I agree. And so you could sit there and try to say all the horrible things about the candidate for whom they're planning to vote. And the person could say, yeah, I stipulate all that. It's just, the other person's even worse. So that's why I'm doing it. So what I'm saying, and this is where the title of my talk comes, if you saw it in the brochure, is I'm saying it doesn't make sense to do something that you think is kind of immoral, or you're voting for a bad person, that someone you really actually don't like, whose policies don't come anywhere near your preferences, because you think you're acting smart and pragmatically. Because no, you're not. Your particular vote does absolutely nothing. And so if it's not something you feel good about, then there's no point in doing this. To give it a silly analogy, just to drive home this point, you're over at your friend's house, and you're getting ready to leave. Oh, hang on 1 second. I need 5 minutes. And he takes out magnets out of his fridge and spells it Trump. He goes, okay, now we can go. You're like, what did you just do that for? And he's like, because Hillary's trying to take our guns. That's why. He's like, what is that? And he's like, Bob, Supreme Court. That's why I did this. And what do you say? And so the point is, the guy, he just kept sitting there telling you how bad Hillary was, and that's why he arranged Trump on his fridge. You would be utterly baffled. By the same token, when someone's trying to explain to me why next week they're going to go and pull the lever for Trump in a voting booth, I'm equally baffled that the two have nothing to do with whether Hillary's in power or not. Right? Now, the obvious response is people say, wait a minute, Bob, that's clever, and there's something fishy, though, because if everybody acted like you, well, then Hillary is going to win. And I said, okay, if everybody acted like me, then there'd be 150 million podcasts taking down Paul Krugman every week, right? So that would be awesome. I would much rather have that. All right, so again, just look at where the logic goes, though, even in terms of voting. So, okay, right. So that's why, if you're agreeing with me that you really don't like Trump, it's like, and you don't like, what's Gary Johnson and so on, okay, go write in whatever. Go write in Lou Rockwell or something, right? So if the reasoning you're using is I want to be Immanuel Kant and do the thing that I wish everyone else would do, okay, so go write in the candidate you really like. Because you see what I'm saying? So it's this weird thing where they flip back and forth between pragmatism and idealism, where they're saying, oh no, I'm doing this thing that I feel queasy about because I'm just looking at the consequences, and I'm pointing out, no, consequentially, your thing has nothing to do with whether Trump or Hillary is elected. And then they say, okay, but I can't just reason selfishly like that. I got to take one for the team and do what I want the team to do. You say, right, you just told me you wish the team would all vote for, Ron Paul or somebody like that. So why don't you go ahead if you are going to go vote? So anyway, that's the thing. I'm not telling people what to do. I'm just trying to get them to see that a lot of times the justification, when they try to explain to me why they're doing what they're doing, it doesn't make any sense. They keep flipping back and forth. So let me, in the few minutes I have left here now, talk a little bit about why I've taken the stance I have, and then to get you to see how this affects the power of the state. So I think the part of why I don't like voting, and now this is less of an unpopular opinion. So as Jeff was talking about how there's silver linings here, for me the silver lining has been in previous elections, I don't like confrontation. Like if I'm at a social gathering and people want to start talking about politics, I usually just nod my head and I don't get into it. But if someone point blank was saying, well, who are you going to vote for? In previous elections, if I said, oh, I don't vote, they would get mad at me, right? Like they would really, people have died for this, and they get really mad, because the Fuhrer was sitting around thinking, how can I keep Bob Murphy from voting? That's what they were. He's like, how many Panzer divisions do we devote to that? And they're all right. So so what they're, but this time around, talking to normal people or whatever, and then they say, what are you doing? And I say, oh, I don't vote. And they'll just go, yeah. They don't get mad. Like this time around, people at least see the appeal of that, like, oh, you're just not going to participate. That's interesting. Let me think about that, So that's the one silver lining. But part of my rationale for that is because, as Ryan was pointing out here, they like to use it to legitimize the state, right? The cliche of if you don't vote, you have no right to complain, that sort of thing. That they want to go through these elections so that people feel like, well, we just lost this time around. So if we don't like what Hillary's doing, then 4 years from now we just got to put in new people, right? The people running the state like that mentality. They want you to think that the only avenue by which you can affect social change is by going and knocking on doors and getting people to sign petitions to get your guy or your woman on the ballot next time around. They like thinking that that's the channel through which you have to move. In general, no, that's not true. As Mises, he was relaying a point that David Hume made, all governments rest on public opinion, even totalitarian dictatorships, right? And so it's, the function, the social function from their point of view of having periodic elections is just to reassure the masses that this is a representative system. And so if you don't like what we're doing, don't worry, just go to the polls later on. And so if you can do other things to try to get the public to reduce their respect for the people in power, then that's also very effective. And so clearly that's what I've been doing with my time. So it's not that I'm apathetic. It's that I think there's better uses of my time than fretting over, oh, gee, who are we going to vote for this next time around? Let me just give you a few observations to drive home that point. So some people, when they hear that kind of talk, they think it's very naive. And they say, no, these totalitarian dictatorships, they have a police state. If you criticize the government, they lock you up or they just disappear. So that's what keeps those people in power. That is true. That's one necessary element of their control, but it's also they control public opinion there. If it were correct to say that in these really totalitarian states, it's all about how many guns they have and it's not about public opinion, then in those totalitarian states, they would have open media. The schools would have nothing to do with the government. The ruler wouldn't care. He'd say, yeah, go ahead and teach whatever you want in school. Go ahead and look whatever you want on the internet because if you challenge me, you're dead. But that's not what they do. It's precisely in these closed societies where the ruler has much more power than they do in so-called Western societies where they have the tightest control over the information that people get because it's in those societies in particular where most people have to not know how bad it is. Otherwise, the regime would fall. All right. I saw somebody come to NYU one time, and he gave a really interesting talk about what was called network goods. And he was talking about, he had this example where he said that in totalitarian regimes in particular, they have to quickly scrub anti-regime graffiti. Right? That if somebody in the middle of the night climbs up on a bridge and says, the ruler's bad or down with so-and-so, the regime has to quickly scrub that because it's a focal point. It's a signal. When other dissidents see that, it's not merely that they see it and say, oh, there's at least one other person who thinks like me. It's also not that they know, oh, wait a minute, other people who might be disaffected are seeing that, but they all know that they all know it, right? So it's like it sort of builds esprit de corps, and so that kind of thing needs to be scrubbed immediately. So in terms of our system here, let me just try to, hopefully this works. Okay, great. So I don't know, I'll try to read this to you. I don't know if you guys can see it in the back. So Hillary Clinton had a tweet a while ago. She said, if the FBI is watching you for suspected terrorist links, you shouldn't be able to just go buy a gun with no questions asked. So this wise guy says, if the FBI is investigating you, you shouldn't be able to run for president. Okay, but now those of you who use Twitter, you know, and you do this probably without even thinking about it, what do you do when you see something you love and it's hilarious? You go and check and see how many other people have liked this or retweeted it. And so it's not just that this guy had a great zinger, but you look and say, oh, 3.2 thousand people liked this status or this tweet that this guy put out. So if you're, concerned about a Hillary Clinton presidency or whatever, this thing gives you hope. It's not just that you derived enjoyment out of seeing this guy zing her. It's you realize 3,000 other people, saw this. So then you extrapolate and say, well, how many people weren't at their computer or whatever. So you see, oh, there must be many millions of Americans who would have read this and thought this is hilarious, right? So you see the function of this and how, in terms of undermining the legitimacy of a corrupt regime, the methods we have right now. It's not merely that we can beam information into millions of people's brains with low cost. It's that we can all be aware of what our numbers are. And it's this kind of thing. So in terms of, undermining a potential Clinton presidency, whether she gets in or not, to me, the 2 seconds it took this guy to send that tweet out is way more useful than him waiting in a line and casting a vote for somebody against Hillary on election day. And so I guess it sounds like I'm wrapping up and saying.
Okay, that was Robert Murphy from Mises Media on YouTube. Check them out and spread that video. Is it smart to vote immorally? Now, a lot of this I've covered at some level, but one thing that we talked about many times too, when it comes to looking at are people thinking like me? We've been able to garnish so much information because of the internet and that freedom of flow, definitely in a lot of areas, even though now we're seeing a lot of that being scrubbed because everything's becoming so social media, where you have a few companies, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, that are really dominating, and because of that, they're limiting or not even allowing certain people to get information. But when people are commenting, when you leave a comment under articles, what a lot of people are seeing now is articles may not get as many, clicks as you would like, but ideas are being spread through the comment sections. And for the people that do actually take a step back and have that principle of individual liberty and freedom, they take that step back and they really look at the basis of what is happening in whatever situation, laws being passed, who's being elected or running for office, and they can go in and in a way that, like that zinger, you can actually word a pretty in-depth analysis of something into a simple form that everyone can get, and do it in a way that isn't offensive, so people actually look at the message that you're sending. Now, sometimes a zinger like that, though, like Robert was saying, zingers like that, though, it shows you go, that's just awesome. I love that. I can't believe he said that. That's just awesome. And you look at all the likes, you realize you're not alone. And I kind of like the like system a little bit better than the comment system for one fact. It's more of a unifier rather than a divider, because people still want to argue their differences even when they really have a goal that they're sharing. If your goal is freedom, you can argue about candidates or that one position that they may differ a little bit on, but mainly the same, the little differences. But if you both share the basic principles, that candidate shares the basic principles, and those basic principles being freedom, then you should be able to find the common ground on what we can agree on and work on to move forward away from this big government to a limited government. Will we see that in Trump? I don't know. We definitely didn't see it in Obama. We've definitely seen that dividing um, element coming out of the Obama administration. And I want to cover this one thing that got passed, then I want to get on to an article um, involving Obama, and then um, we'll go from there into a little bit of Trump before the end of the broadcast and everything that's surrounding his election results. So let's go ahead and get into this article from Reason.com. And this is a concerning one for people in Washington. And this is titled, again from Reason.com, A Resounding Vote Against Due Process and the Second Amendment. Like a California law that took effect last January, the gun control initiative that Washington voters overwhelmingly approved on Tuesday authorizes court orders that deprive people of the right to arms without due process. In fact, Initiative 1491, which was backed by Governor Jay Inslee and attracted support from 71% of voters, is even less respectful of due process and the Second Amendment. Both laws allow police officers and other concerned, meddlesome, or possibly malicious individuals to ask a judge for a gun violence restraining order in California or an extreme risk protection order in Washington, which prohibits its target from buying or possessing firearms and requires him to surrender any he already owns. In California, orders can be requested by immediate family members, a category that includes spouses, domestic partners, current or former roommates, parents, step-parents, parents-in-law, grandparents, step-grandparents, siblings, step-siblings, siblings-in-law, children, stepchildren, children-in-law, and grandchildren. The authors of Initiative 1491 thought that list was not long enough, so they added dating partners, baby mamas or papas, former legal guardians, and all relatives, including aunts, uncles, and cousins. They also extend the deadline for a former roommate, which could be an ex-spouse or ex-lover, seeking an order from 6 months after moving out to a year. Both laws allow judges to issue temporary orders that disarm people without giving them notice or a chance to object. In California, where temporary orders last up to 3 weeks, petitioners who are not police officers are required to show a substantial likelihood that the subject of the petition poses a significant danger in the near future of personal injury to himself, herself, or another. In Washington, where temporary orders last up to 2 weeks, the one way in which Washington's law is less objectable, the petitioner has to show a reasonable fear that the respondent poses a significant danger of causing personal injury to self or others. The latter formulation is looser since it requires neither a substantial likelihood nor evidence that the threat is imminent. Washington's law is also less demanding in its requirements for a 1-year order, which can be issued after a hearing at which the respondent finally gets a chance to oppose the petition. In California, the petitioner has to show by clear and convincing evidence that the respondent poses a significant danger of personal injury to himself or others. In Washington, the petitioner has to show by a preponderance of the evidence that the respondent poses a significant danger of causing personal injury to self or others. Preponderance of the evidence, which amounts to any probability greater than 50%, is a significantly lighter burden of proof than clear and convincing evidence, which means a claim is highly and substantially more probable to be true than not. In this case, the claim is that the respondent poses a significant danger. A phrase initiative 1491 does not define whatever probability of harm amounts to a significant danger. The preponderance of the evidence standard effectively cuts it in half. So, if a 10% risk of significant, a person can lose his Second Amendment rights, even if there is a 95% probability that he will never use a gun to harm himself or anyone else. And you can read the rest of that at reason.com. So, and another thing to point out is the very, very low voter turnout can help things like this because, well, a lot of people aren't showing up but might have voted against this. Well, now it's passed. Why I say if you're going to vote at the local level. If you have things like this on the ballot, go out there and vote against them. If that's your only vote, write in, no confidence, vote of no confidence in every other box, but, vote against things that abridge your rights without due process, this being one of them. Because at least this you could have voted against. This you could have probably actually made a change. But I have one here, which originally, first article I've seen, this came across my Facebook article. It wasn't, or newsfeed. It wasn't actually an article. It was just the link to executive order. And this one's executive order advancing the global health security agenda to achieve a world safe and secure from infectious disease threats. And this was on whitehouse.gov. And then, of course, I go back to my Facebook and, related articles. And, of course, got a good one here from Activist Post that popped up. This one's titled, Obama Quietly Signs Executive Order to Achieve Global Vaccination Agenda. Of course, I read through the executive order itself on whitehouse.gov. It's really not too long. It's actually pretty short. And it discusses basically how we're going to have the global health security agenda, which, all the partnering countries and all that stuff, that they'll put in these implements to prevent infectious disease, which is kind of vague. Well, I went to this article here, and it's titled, Obama Quietly Signs Executive Order to Achieve Global Vaccination Agenda from Activist Post. So, I want to read this here. Last Friday, November 4th, Obama quietly signed Executive Order titled Advancing the Global Health Security Agenda to Achieve a World Safe and Secure from Infectious Disease Threats. Quote, it is the policy of the United States to advance the global health security agenda, which is a multifaceted, multi-country initiative intended to accelerate partner countries' measurable capabilities to achieve specific targets to prevent, detect, and respond to infectious disease threats, GHSA targets. whether naturally occurring, deliberate, or accidental, unquote. So basically, the agenda is to push vaccines and normalize quarantine procedures across nations during outbreaks. And I go, really? That I can see where you can believe that that's what's going to happen in that, but and while the article goes further on, it says GHSA immunization agenda states that participating countries must have, quote, a functioning national vaccine delivery system with nationwide reach, effective distributions, access for marginalized populations, adequate cold chain, and ongoing quality control, unquote. Quote, at least 90% coverage of the country's 15-month-old population with at least one dose of measles containing vaccine, unquote. That struck me. And it's one of those things, well, you can't promise a 90% coverage unless you're going to force vaccinations. So this is really important. They, through this, basically would have to force everybody to give 15-month-old population with at least one dose of measles containing vaccine. It says measles containing vaccine. That's alarming. Forced vaccination. It says here some notable 5-year action items include conduct routine immunization activities, implement case-based surveillance, achieve and document vaccination of healthcare workers. Then it says here, Bill Gates provided the CDC with a surveillance tool that helps identify district-level measles risk based on immunization records. Oh, you don't have a measles immunization? You need to come with us. Maybe. What's more, the HHS recently proposed giving the CDC the power to detain and quarantine people without due process. Quote, when the apprehension occurs, the individual is not free to leave or discontinue his or her discussion with an HHS, CDC, public health, or quarantine officer, unquote. Quote, the proposed practice to issue federal orders before a medical examination has taken place, unquote. Quote, CDC defines pre-communicable stage to mean the stage beginning upon an individual's earliest opportunity for exposure to an infectious agent. Think about that. Let me state that quote again. CDC defines pre-communicable stage to mean the stage beginning upon an individual's earliest opportunity for exposure to an infectious agent. That means you have your child at the hospital, they're going to get every vaccine if they want them to. Every vaccine. If that's what they want to do, according to that. If the CDC has that power to detain without due process. But a lot of times, what if they vaccinate you before that? What if you end up sick Another quote, CDC may enter into an agreement with the individual upon such terms as the CDC considers to be reasonably necessary, indicating that the individual consents to any of the public health measures authorized under this part, including quarantine, isolation, conditional release, medical examination, hospitalization, vaccination, and treatment, provided that the individual's consent shall not be considered as a prerequisite to any exercise of any authority under this part. Individuals, another quote, individuals who violate the terms of the agreement or the terms of the federal order for quarantine, isolation, or conditional release, even if no agreement is in place between the individual and the government, he or she may be subject to criminal penalties. The source of all quotes above is the official proposed rule for the control of communicable diseases by Health and Human Services. And check out that article. They got a couple clips, I think, there, and all the links to all the articles. Activist post, again, that was titled Obama Quietly Signs Executive Order to Achieve Global Vaccination Agenda. I think that's something that needs to go viral. Because everybody, Trump, Hillary, voting, not voting, blah, 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 and bam. And you don't hear this even coming out of most alternative media either. Because we're all on the Trump-Hillary thing. Wham. This is going on now. So make it viral. Activist post, Obama quietly signs executive order to achieve global vaccination agenda. Make it viral. And again, you can go whitehouse.gov and they have the executive order advancing the global health security agenda to achieve a world safe and secure from infectious disease threats. But now, I'm going to dive a little bit into the political sphere now that I got that out. That's something I definitely wanted out before we get into what everybody's talking about. Now, what's worrying me a little bit, it should be worrying everybody, but it's not a big surprise either. It's something that I kind of expect to see. It kind of proves a lot of our points. A lot of the points that have been made tonight. Sorry, I had a sneeze there. This came across my feed. It was from theblaze.com. After promising a full repeal of Obamacare, Trump is shifting course on the health care bill. Throughout the entire campaign season, President-elect Donald Trump vowed to completely repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, but now the brash billionaire seems to be rethinking or at least rewording his foundational campaign promise. In an interview Friday with the Wall Street Journal, Trump said he wanted to move quickly on the 2010 health bill, but struck a more bipartisan tone on how he would alter President Barack Obama's signature legislation, saying either Obamacare will be amended or repealed and replaced. After meeting with Obama in the White House Thursday, Trump expressed an interest in preserving two key provisions in the current law. He wants to maintain measures that block insurers from denying coverage because of a patient's pre-existing conditions, and a provision that allows children to remain on the parent's health care plan until the age of 26. I like those very much, the president-elect said. Trump said he made the decision to reconsider a full repeal of the Affordable Care Act after his conversation with Obama, whom the businessman said made suggestions about provisions in the health care law to preserve. I told him I will look at his suggestions, and out of respect, I will do that, Trump said. Trump used the promise of a full repeal of the health law as somewhat of a rallying cry throughout the election cycle. According to his campaign website, he believes Obamacare is certain to collapse of its own weight and of the individual mandate, which the GOP has largely rejected. He said no person should be required to buy insurance unless he or she wants to. The website even promises Trump will call for the full repeal of Obamacare on day one of the Trump administration. It is important to note, however, that all the Obamacare replacement proposals presented by Republican lawmakers includes provisions similar to the ones Trump is interested in retaining. Day one, not happening. Day one on anything, not happening. Maybe day two, maybe day one, but it's going to be in the middle of the night. I don't consider that day one, and I consider that at night. Maybe he'll pass the executive order, but really, executive order over executive order needs to stop. Really, if you were to get the White House, you want to be a constitutional, president. The only executive order you could possibly sign would basically be one to repeal multiple presidents' executive orders that were unconstitutional. Stating that these were unconstitutional when made, that they are void, basically. Do you think that's going to happen, though? I doubt it. Again, there's never going to be a candidate that believes in everything I believe in, except maybe me, but I don't plan on ever running. But at the same time, they have to hold somewhat the same principles. Now, I don't know Trump. I don't pretend to know Trump. I've just known what he said and what he supposedly says he represents. I don't agree with a lot of what he said. But, again, wait and see. Actions speak louder than words. I tend to give a lot of people the benefit of that out, even when I shouldn't. But again, we'll see. We'll see what he does. I think that there is ways that presidents can basically get through their presidency without really truly doing anything that would negatively affect someone if they did things in the right order. But when they don't, if it seems like they're trying to do the right thing, you probably should be a little bit less harsh. Call out the things that you believe they're doing wrong, but leave it at that. These people believe that the results of the election were wrong. Hillary should have won. This is now there. I've already seen people calling it rigged. It had to have been rigged. Look at all the support that was out there. The support was basically in the elite circles, the Hollywood circles, the New York elite circles. I don't think it was out on the streets, the main streets. That's the problem with the mainstream media. They didn't show you what was really going on. They show you all these rich and famous people supporting Hillary. They find the most redneck, hillbilly, racist people to show you on mainstream media that represent Trump. They show Trump up close, making remarks that I personally believe were not the best remarks to ever make. They show Hillary a little bit further back with people waving signs, speaking fluff, with people standing behind her. But if you zoomed way out, Trump had a crap load of people at his events where Hillary didn't. And the mainstream media, well, not just mainstream media, just the media in general, there's an article, internal article, basically, through the media. A few different people now are talking about it. And they basically, whoever wrote the article, are asking, what did we do wrong? What did we do wrong? Did we pull Trump wrong? Were the polls wrong? Was it? What did we do when we covered Trump that was wrong? Did we not highlight what we like about Hillary enough? But I think it's much bigger than that. If Trump would have lost and Hillary would have won, we would have heard the same questioning behind, alternative media circles. And what would have really came of it would have been, it was rigged. Now we're starting to hear that from left protests. We would have seen protests on, if Trump would have lost. Rigged elections. Now we're just seeing it from the other side. So we get the same response. But it's so much bigger. Neither side was willing to accept the faults of their candidate. So whoever would have lost, why? What could we have done different? be a little more honest. That would have helped. If you would have called out the problems with that candidate, maybe we wouldn't have had Hillary and Trump. We wouldn't have had Bush, Rubio. You know, look at who we had across the board. Libertarian Party, Green Party. Look who we had across the board. Better hope Trump sticks to his word about most of what he says he's going to do that would be constitutionally aligned. And less of what he said he was going to do that would not be constitutionally aligned. Supreme Court, who are we going to get? Some people are suggesting Ted Cruz, others Andrew Napolitano, which I personally would choose Andrew Napolitano. If he went with Ted Cruz, from what I know of Ted Cruz and what he's fought for gun rights in the past, I would think he would be a good candidate. But that's from those instances and had to do with a lot of about gun control. What other issues I don't know enough about. I do with Andrew Napolitano. Of course, he's been more in the spotlight, more vocal. Had a very successful show on Fox that surprisingly got canceled, to the shock of many. It was pretty interesting when he had his show Freedom Watch on Fox, because when he still had that show, that Ron Paul revolution was kind of still alive. A lot of those people were kind of building themselves, you know, a kind of comfortable area around Freedom Watch. And then you started seeing Glenn Beck just slowly, not a lot, but slowly start getting a little bit more libertarian, at least more, you know, constitutional libertarian. And people still had a little hope. They're like, you know, Glenn should hang out with Andrew a lot more, you know, he keep learning more from him, and, you know, things will get a little bit better. And then, you know, everything just kind of fell apart. Well, I think under this Trump presidency, the people that were involved in this Ron Paul revolution, the ones all the way back from 2008, all the way up to the 2012 one, we have to unite again to hold Trump's feet to the fire. There's one thing we do know about Trump. He wants to win. We know this about Trump. He wants to win. He likes to win big. We got 4 years of it. Hold his feet to the fire. You want to win big next election. Hold his feet to the fire. The people that voted for him, that believe in the Constitution and believe in individual rights, natural law. This can be one of our few chances to make a big effect. Because a lot of people rallied behind him because of the Obamacare issue, the Supreme Court. Gun laws. A lot of people across a lot of spectrums that believe in those things can rally together. And a lot of those people were in the Ron Paul revolution. So, in these 4 years, if we want to make a chance, the activists, the alternative media, and the voters that voted for him, rally behind these simple things. No one should be forced to buy health insurance or any product. No one, definitely with this executive order, no one could be forced to be vaccinated. I think there are a lot of people that could stand up for these things. And again, Trump likes to win. He likes to win big. The only scenario I can see where he would be willing to lose, if he thinks the presidency is just too much. If his ratings among the people that voted for him plummet, then that's what we probably should fear. Because that might mean he doesn't want it. Thank you all for tuning in. You guys have a great weekend. Don't forget to support UCY. Click the support tab at the top of UCY.tv or click the Amazon button down at the bottom. Support tab, you can donate or shop Amazon through UCY.tv. Same great prices, same great shipping. And they get a little kickback. Thank you again for tuning in. Don't forget, check out anti-tyrannynews.com.